Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of PRDecoded. My name is Steve Barrett. I'm the editorial director of PR Week, going to guide you through the start of a great day. We've got a brilliant day of content ahead of us, topped off with the Purpose Awards at 4 o'clock Eastern time, so be sure to hang around for that. And if you missed any of yesterday's content, you can still access it on Catch Up. Just go into the theatre and all the panels and sessions and keynotes are there for you to look at. So do that. Also, remember to visit our networking environment, talk to people, other delegates, go and look at the sponsor booths, some brilliant assets there, and you can check out lots of case studies, company information. After the awards, all the case studies will be available, and you'll be able to download a book of content about the winning case studies. And I think everybody is looking to, there's no playbook for Purpose yet, so everyone's looking to learn from those brilliant examples. Don't forget to ask questions as well in the Q&A part of the panel, and I will weave those into this session, and the other facilitators will also weave them into those presentations. Please do get those questions coming in as early as possible so that we can include them along the way and we can make sure it's an interactive session. But now to kick off day 2, really delighted to have Frank Cooper with us, who's the global CMO of Blackrock. Frank's had a storied career. He's been at Pepsi and BuzzFeed, in marketing roles, senior marketing roles there. So really at the forefront of Pepsi's work around purpose, which was sort of very significant in the modern era. He's also had time at Motown and Def Jam. So great experience and really good to have you with us, Frank. Welcome to PRDecoded.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Steve. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so the session's called In Good Times and Bad, Purpose as a Corporate Compass. And I think Blackrock's made a big contribution to the whole purpose agenda by leading the way. And I think we need leadership on purpose, and business generally needs to lead. We saw the Business Roundtable last year signing up to putting purpose on a similar footing to shareholder value. So to kick us off, Frank, talk to us about that purpose-driven agenda at Blackrock, how it fits in with your company's strategy actually within the company, but also how does it play out when you're talking to the companies you're invested in, because BlackRock is the biggest global asset manager in the world with $7 trillion plus under management. So talk us through that to kick us off.
Absolutely. And look, I'll start off by saying our size does matter. We're at 0.8 trillion today and growing. But what we decided early on was that we would not let our size dictate how we would behave in the marketplace, that we wanted to be a value-added player no matter what. And more important, and it's one of the reasons why, as I moved my career and I landed here, more important, they wanted to kind of lead the change. BlackRock said, there's change going to happen. We'd like to be the ones who are helping to lead that change. So that's kind of the start of it. So on purpose, let me start with Larry Fink's letter. Larry Fink has been writing a letter to 1,000 or so CEOs for the past 8 years or so. And there's a common theme in these letters. And that common theme is we should take a long-term view as investors of the companies in which we invest. We're copying these short-term cycles, and we miss the real value within the companies, but also we prevent these companies from growing to their full potential by having a short-term view. So that's kind of been the underlying theme in all of the letters. In 2018, he wrote about the notion that purpose is absolutely central to the way in which we think about the long-term viability of companies. And I think, Steve, the reason it caught on is because it came from the center of the financial services industry, from an asset management company. Other people have been talking about purpose before, but not from this context, not from the seat as an investment. And at the heart of it is the notion that if you look at what people in general, the general public, citizens, communities, what they're expecting of corporations, particularly global corporations or multinational corporations, they're expecting them to do more than just maximize profits for shareholders. They're saying if you want to be invited into the community and you want us to embrace and support you, if you want to use our roads and take the benefit of our taxes, we need to see that you're contributing to the public good in some way. So that's kind of one piece of it. Second piece of it is as you start to look for the best talent in the world, in your community or in your industry, the best talent is consistently saying, I actually want a job that pays me well. I want a job that has some kind of status to it that I enjoy. But I also want a job that I feel like I'm contributing to something bigger than myself. And so this notion of attracting and retaining and advancing the best talent, purpose is becoming more critical. Then finally, the social license to operate for many companies are being threatened because many communities view that on balance, the harm that a company does or a brand outweighs any good that it actually generates. And so for those three reasons, I think we're seeing the risk factors facing companies who don't adopt purpose increase. And for us, that's been the central theme. It's that you can interpret this as kind of social movements, social trends. We translate that into risk to the assets that companies hold.
Yeah, that's a good point, because it's only then when purpose, if people see it as a value and an asset and really a benefit to an organization, then it's going to drive shareholder value ultimately anyway, isn't it? So that it's important to make that point, that this isn't just about doing good; it's doing good for good business. Was there, when the first sort of statement in 18 came out from Larry Fink, I mean, was there any pushback? Because the financial world hasn't necessarily always been on board with these sort of ideas. What was the reaction, and how how did everyone respond?
Yeah, no, there was a lot of pushback. There's a ton of support, and you got that early on. And this is where I think, for me, I had the most pride in what Larry did. Larry had the courage to put it out, knowing that he was putting a target on Blackrock's back at the same time, right? And so we put the statement out. Most people said, "Hey, great, bravo." Some said about time. Some said, welcome to the party. But there was a large segment, particularly of CEOs, that also said, "Wow, that's an additional burden you're putting onto me. I already have short-term pressures. I got activists who are coming at me, both activists who are trying to affect my company's value, and have activists who are trying to change the values within my company. This is another layer of responsibility that I don't believe we should have." And so that became the crux of their argument, is that, why are you forcing this additional responsibility onto us? And our response has been, and I think it's been pretty successful, it's been that, look, we're not inventing this idea that people want purpose-driven companies. We're not inventing the idea that populism is an outcome of people feeling like they're not participating in the prosperity that they see fewer and fewer people participate in. We're not inventing the idea that many people perceive climate change as an existential threat. These are things that are happening. These are things that are growing. They're gaining momentum, and they're gaining traction. They pose a real risk to the assets of companies. And if you just look at it purely through that lens, we believe we're justified in raising this as a requirement. But the other piece of it, and this is what I've always viewed it in this way, you're going to always get a set of people who just don't believe, who don't want to change, or who think that being neutral is the safest approach. My view is that you follow those who are the most enthusiastic about the change, and you bring them in, you work with them, and you expand with them. And that's what we've been trying to do. And we've been open to, we've had conversations. We had a sustainability summit in May. We had a future forum in July. And in both of those forums, we had people from all over the world come into it to talk about purpose in general, but also about environmental sustainability, about diversity and inclusion, about the things that we think matter for long-term viability of companies.
Yeah, so you don't think this is just a flash in the pan that's going to go away? And I guess if it was ever going to be tested, this is the year when it's been tested, when we've got the multiple sort of hits, if you like, of the pandemic, of the incidents of racial injustice. We've had those forest fires out in the West Coast. We've got the election, febrile sort of atmosphere around that. And we have a recession at the end of the day. How has that impacted the commitment to purpose at Blackrock, but also amongst the companies that you interact with and have stakes in?
Well, the interesting thing about a deep social crisis, a moral crisis, and an economic crisis is that it reveals the fractures that exist beneath the surface. All these things existed beneath the surface before the crisis, but now it's amplified and it's accelerated. And so for us, it's reinforced a lot of what we've been saying over the past few years. It's reinforced that diversity and inclusion matters, not just because you want representation of your customer base. It matters because it affects the broader community around you. It matters because those employees who are coming into your office if they experience external discrimination, they're coming in exhausted from swimming against those currents. We look at climate change. We all knew that was an issue before, but now, with the acceleration of the wildfires in Australia, now you're seeing it on the West Coast. It's become kind of a dominant thing. Now, COVID-19 did something else that I think only a pandemic can do. It forced the whole world to slow down. And as we slowed down, we started focusing in on the few things that have been bubbling beneath the surface for all that time. And so institutional and systemic racism, that's bubbled up because there's a greater focus on it. Climate change, there's a greater focus on it, particularly in Europe, but we're even seeing that continue here in the U.S. And so we just think that the crisis has revealed, amplified, and accelerated all those trends that we've been talking about before.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's certainly been a time of self-reflection, hasn't it? And that's a good point, that people have actually been reassessing their values, and that's what this is all about, isn't it? What do you say to those? I think a lot of people out there, a lot of people listening into this would want to know, how do you enact purpose and really take action? So you're going beyond just statements on social media or going dark when something bad happens, or even just the Business Roundtable letter, which was great, 100 CEOs, and even Larry Fink's letter. But you have to back that up with action. So what would your advice be to corporations and communicators and marketers who are navigating that difficult transition and making sure they stay on mission? Because what Patagonia does is going to be different to what Procter & Gamble does, for example.
Absolutely, it's such a great question, because I mean, what I would say is this. I would start with the notion of what you said, what's embedded in your question itself. I would start with the notion that actions are greater than words. Demonstrate first before you try to perfect even your purpose statement. And we all go through the process of working through the purpose statement, and I can almost guarantee, I've now looked at hundreds of purpose statements, and they all kind of, if you're in a certain industry, they're going to all swim around the same area, and that's not what differentiates the company. It's the actions that differentiate it. So that's kind of the first kind of just a philosophical approach, is think about, have a bias for action over words. But the way in which we did it, and the companies that I've seen that have some success in here, particularly those that may not have started off as purpose-driven companies, we started from the bottom up. And as we started crafting the purpose statement, we went back in time, we looked at early documents, we asked the founders what they were thinking, we asked clients, and we said, at our best, what do you think we contribute to the world? We looked at employees across every function, every region, at every level. We held a 3-day, what we call jam session, where we just talked about purpose in Blackrock and ways in which we contribute positively to society. And so this bottom-up approach got everyone invested in the purpose statement itself. So we did that, and I think that got us 20% of the way there. But the big part of it was connecting the employees' purpose, their sense that they are fulfilled and energized to the company purpose. That was the big leap, and that was the hard part, and that was perhaps the most important part of it. And again, we put together a workbook on it, and it almost sounds a little bit like therapy, but it requires employees to go deep within themselves and find out what are the things that energize them and give them a sense of fulfillment. And Steve, I'll tell you, the first thing that almost everyone does, they'll go like, oh, what fulfills me? I like skiing, I like hiking, I like cycling, and I don't feel like I can connect that to my job. You have to get past that piece of the hobbies and then get to like the core things that actually make you have a sense of fulfillment. I actually like when I help someone achieve their potential. I like if I'm helping people solve problems. You work through that piece of it and then connect that to your experience at work, your experience at Blackrock in our case. And that could be through an employee network. That could be through a philanthropy. That could be directly through your job. But that's the great unlock, because the test that everyone on the outside will put to a company is, what are your employees saying? What are they doing? Are they living the purpose? Because if they're not living the purpose, the company can't live its purpose. And to me, that's the great unlock. It's more important than the purpose statement itself. It's the internal piece of it. And then finally, the external side of it. The difference for me between purpose and all the other things that preceded it, philanthropy preceded it. We had cause marketing, this is your brain on drugs, that thing, that preceded it. We had CSR, that preceded it. The difference in purpose is that it's not viewed as an externality to the company. It is core to the company's operations. And if it's core to the company's operations, then you have to tie it to your strategy. You have to tie it to your hiring practices. You have to tie it to innovation. And the outside world should see it manifest in your products, in your services. And that, to me, is the second test. Internal is the first one with employees. The second test is external, but it's going to show up specifically through your products and services, and not as an add-on, not as benevolence on the side. It's core to what you do, and it's consistent with the values that you state within your purpose.
Yeah, great stuff. Remember, if you've got questions for Frank, do get them into the system and we'll weave them into the programming. That's a great point about the internal communication. But also, do you think we over obsess about the definitions and the labeling? I mean, to be fair, we've got a session coming up later all about a big analysis of all of last year's Purpose Awards and trying to see trends, trying to see the things that worked, trying to see things that didn't. But you talked about CSR, ESG, stakeholder engagement, lots of acronyms. And do those things matter? And does the definition matter? Or is purpose a much better definition? Or should we spend a bit less time on that and a bit more time on actually doing stuff and getting to the action part of the matrix?
Well, again, I always have a biased reaction. And I think we can't obsess too much on the categories. But I think it's important to understand the message that's being communicated to us beneath those categories. The theme throughout all of that, from philanthropy through CSR to purpose, the theme is there's an expanding expectation by a broad group of stakeholders on the role that a corporation should play in the world. And there's a reason for it. If you look at the past 25 or so years, even more than that, you're seeing declining trust in institutions. You're seeing the government pull out of spaces that it used to fill to keep the market in balance. You're seeing kind of a growing reliance on the company to fulfill the kind of retirement goals of employees. It's no longer the pension plans. Now the 401k plan has to do it. So more employees are on their own. Over and over and over, what we're hearing across the world, but particularly in the U.S. and particularly in Europe and Western Europe, we're hearing people say the companies, particularly global companies, need to play a role in solving some of the most pressing issues facing society. That's the message. Now, whether we call that purpose, whether we call that CSR, I think it is important, but not critical. How do you make a positive contribution to the world? How do you fulfill some unmet human need? That to me is the core question. Here's the distinction that I would like to make, though, Steve, is that I do think that between CSR and purpose, the key and by the way, I think both are important. The key to me is CSR, maybe it's in your supply chain, and maybe it's related to your company, maybe it's an externality of the company, but you're not making it your ultimate goal. It's a ancillary piece of what you do. Purpose becomes the ultimate goal of the company. Profits become one of the outputs from that. It's a notion of doing well by doing good. It's not doing well and doing good. It's not the win-win. It's doing well by doing good. It's embedded in the core operating model of the company. It becomes the company's ultimate goal. And I think that distinction is really important.
Yeah, it's in the DNA. And you can't manufacture that very easily, can you? It has to be sort of organic. We got a couple of questions coming. Chris Grindrod, he says, "What were your responsibilities at Motown and Def Jam, and what kinds of experiences from them made an impact on where you are now?" Very different organization you're at now.
Very different organization, so I started off as a lawyer, and this is quite a long story, but I'm trying to make it short. I had a litigator who told me early in my career. He said, "Frank, find out what your personal interests are. You know what they are, and connect that with your professional interests. Otherwise, your personal interests over time will go to the wayside. And you're early in your career. Why not blend the two together?" That's how I ended up in entertainment. And it's a long backstory of why I was connected to it. So I started off as a lawyer, and I started off as a lawyer even at Motown. I ran business affairs. When I went to Def Jam, I moved to the business side. I ran the publishing company. I started a sub label. But here's the thing I learned through those experiences. I learned two things that I carry forward. Number one, that culture affects virtually every industry. If you start with culture, you look at what's happening among people, how they think, what their hopes are, their dreams, their aspirations. You can look at it on a community level. You can look at it on a national level. You can look at it across geographic lines. But there are cultural groupings that are shaping industries, even financial services, which has historically thought of itself as kind of an isolated industry serving just clients. So that's the first thing I learned. And understanding how a brand fits within culture is becoming essential. The second thing I learned is that purpose does matter. I look at both Motown and Def Jam as purpose-driven companies. They came at it from two completely different ways. Motown was all about assimilation into mainstream culture. Berry Gordy took, Diana Ross and the Temptations and Stevie Wonder and Marvin Gaye, and he crafted them in a way that it became true to kind of Black culture, but acceptable and digestible within mainstream culture, and ultimately became the sound of young America, during the 60s and 70s. And 80s it changed a bit, and 90s it changed even more. Def Jam went the opposite direction. They're like, we're not assimilating to anything. We're going to give it to you straight, uncut, uncensored. This is who we are. But what they did, they understood that within culture, as trust in institutions decline, people were trying to figure out, how do you overcome struggle? And so at its best, Def Jam and hip hop was a playbook for individuals to think through, how do you overcome struggle? How do you do it on your own? How do you operate outside the mainstream and still thrive? It was a playbook for all those things that were gaps, particularly for youth culture at that particular time. And so purpose and looking at cultural branding for me started back in the music industry with Motown and Def Jam.
Yeah, great brands, great mission, really authentic. And Motown was obviously around during a time of civil rights that many people are comparing to now. Are there any artists or cultural movements that really equate to that? Obviously, we have the Black Lives Matter movement, but I'm thinking more in terms of artists like the Motown artists. So maybe I'm out of touch. I'm an old man, but maybe are there any that you see that?
Yeah, no, I think it's happening right in front of us. But even you go back to the Motown days, and when Marvin Gaye wanted to put out the album "What's Going On," Berry Gordy hated it. Berry Gordy said, "Oh my God, this is songs about love and togetherness, and you're now raising social issues. No one wants to hear that." Berry Gordy wanted to kill that album. And of course, it became one of the classic albums of the Motown era. It plays well today. He's a heroic figure because he was speaking to an unmet need within culture, and he captured the zeitgeist at the right moment. I think if you look to today, there's a wide range. I'd say a lot of music, and for those who are fans of current music, forgive me for saying it, I think a lot of music today is purposefully disposable. It's purposefully disposable. It's meant to kind of generate very quickly. You enjoy it. If you wanted to play it 2 years from now, it probably will sound old and not useful to you. but there is a subset of artists and music that is speaking to people and their needs. If I look at Billie Eilish, she's talking about existential angst in the world. If I look at Kendrick Lamar, and all of his albums, he's talking about the conditions and treatment of Black people in the world. And then you have some artists that surprise you. There's a rap artist named 21 Savage who's out trying to teach financial literacy of all things, and so it's an interesting time. I think there's a consciousness among artists. Some of them apply it directly to their music today, but some apply it outside and are really active in the culture and active in trying to help people advance. And so I think it's been as promising as ever. But it's an indication to all of us that, because I see music as the first tier of culture. When you see that happening in music, you can almost guarantee that it is going to be a mainstream event. So for me, it's a call to action for all of us that you're going to see people wanting to companies and brands that really, really matter to them to not be in a neutral position, but to take a stand and to be proactive and consistent and authentic in their actions in effecting positive change in the world.
Yeah, for sure. I can still, Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, still my favorite album of all time. People like Curtis Mayfield. But anyway, this isn't a music podcast or a presentation. Stacey Jones has a question. In a highly matrixed organization, how can you best motivate purpose-driven product development when you're also balancing that against the bottom line?
So it's a great question. And I don't see a conflict between purpose-driven innovation and purpose-driven capitalism to be overall and driving the bottom line. I don't see a conflict there. I think what the conflict occurs when we start to think about purpose as this broad, abstract, save the world concept. And that to me is not purpose. Purpose is simply why your company exists in the world. It can be something as simple as we exist in the world because we want to give people the gift of time. And so we're going to make things more convenient for them. We'll make better delivery systems. We'll do it at scale. We are Amazon. And that purpose is all around convenience and gift of time. Or it could be something as far out as Patagonia. Patagonia is probably consistent and aggressive, but think about what Patagonia does. They make gear for the outdoors, and their whole point is you can't enjoy our product if the outdoors is in some way eroded. And so we're going to protect that at every single stage and everything we do, and we're going to be completely transparent about that. And in between those two things, there's a lot of space to play in. And the key is not to think about purpose as I'm doing good in a philanthropic way, believing that there's no return. It's more of I'm doing good in a way that actually serves a real need, and I believe I can make this profitable. And I'm seeing every single day these opportunities pop up. Here's where it gets tough. Once in a while, you're gonna land on an issue that is going to be probably have a moral undertone to it. Probably will divide the organization, and the instinct will be to stay in neutral. My advice is, and this is where it is difficult in a highly matrix organization, is to get a small group of people who have your view and try to work through how to craft it in a way that's consistent with the way the company operates. So if I look at a company like Nike, and I don't think this was an easy choice for Nike. When Nike decided to back Colin Kaepernick, or Nike decided that they're going to take a really strong stand on racial injustice in the Black Lives Matter movement, some people said, you know what, I'm cynical about that whole thing. And I think that they made a calculated choice that their younger audience would side with this, and their older audience is not, they're not buying as many sneakers. And so it's a calculated choice, at least from the people I've spoken to there. And I've spoken to quite a few. I don't believe that was the calculus that they went through. I think they went through the calculus of what are the principles that we want to stand by. What do we want people to say about us? Because if we try to stay neutral, we're going to get blasted from both sides. Which side feels right and true to us? And I think that's where they landed, and I think that's where all companies should land. Give you one more example, and that's Airbnb. Airbnb and Brian Chesky. he had a really difficult decision to make. He was sitting on $1 billion when the crisis hit, when the pandemic hit. And $1 billion not of his money, is the money of renters who were going to rent host homes, right? And so he would pass the money on to the host, less the fee that they retain. Of course, the pandemic hit, travel shut down. Many people started asking for their money back. He had no real obligation to give them their money back. He could have held on to it. But he said something to me that actually I found to be really illuminating. He said at that moment, and it was a struggle, but he landed on it, and it was like a liberating idea. At that moment, he said, I decided I'm not going to make business decisions. I'm going to make principle decisions. I'm going to think about what are the core values I have, and then how can I use that to make the right decision. And then I'm going to be fiscally responsible, and I'm going to try to do it in the most efficient way, and we'll try to figure out how to make the most profit out of it. I'm going to start with a principled decision. And he gave, not only did he give the $1 billion back to the renters, he then created a fund for $250 million to give to the hosts to help them kind of maintain throughout the crisis. And Airbnb has recovered since that, actually, and it's one of the few companies in that industry that seem to be doing fairly well throughout this pandemic. But I think having those principled decisions is going to be key.
Yeah, and you did a great interview with Brian. It's if you look at it, it'll be on YouTube. Frank interviewing Brian about that. It's a good watch. So do check that out. What about when it gets, it does get awkward? What about a company like Amazon gets criticized, and many others, I'm just choosing them as an example, for not paying much tax, right? But then on the other hand, their owner gives away $100 billion, to help people recover from COVID. How do you sort of, and both of those things can get, a lot of this stuff plays out on social media now, and the narrative is playing out there. How do you balance those sort of things?
Well, look, I start with the notion that purpose is not a panacea. Purpose is not going to solve all your problems, nor will purpose solve all the world's problems. What it will do, though, purpose, if you leverage purpose correctly, it becomes an organizing principle that will unify all your stakeholders, your employees, your customers, your suppliers, the communities in which you operate, as well as your shareholders. And that's a diverse group of people, right, that you have to manage. Purpose actually creates an organizing principle for that entire group. So that's one. Two, my view is you do your part. And again, what purpose does, it helps you focus your energy, because every single day, if you're in a large company, there's someone who's going to come in and say, I have something for you to do that's good for the world. And trust me, none of us has enough money to accommodate all the wishes of people who are coming in. And so purpose helps you identify areas where you want to invest heavily, but it also gives you the power to say no. And then the third thing is this. You're always going to get someone or some group or segment of the population that's going to say, we just don't like what you're doing. We just don't like that. And in my view, it's much like running a political campaign or trying to build a social movement. You always start with the people who are loyal to you, who love you. You go to your soft support. You try to get people who are undecided, who are in between, to come over to your side. But you don't spend a lot of time trying to woo over those who have put the stake in the ground that we just don't like you. And you have to have a little bit of thick skin around that. And you have to have courage, because and I think that's going to be one of the things that people will have to muster up here, particularly corporate leaders, is the courage, because there is no easy, safe zone that you can fall back into, no neutral space that you can fall back into and hope that it blows over. It's not going to blow over because people are taking these stands, but they're holding you as a corporate leader accountable one way or the other. So you might as well choose a side that's consistent with your values and with your core sense of purpose.
Yeah. All right, we've got about a minute left, Frank. So what's next for Blackrock on this purpose journey? And can you give us a little taster of it, of how you're going to develop this agenda moving forward very quickly?
Yeah, so, the next thing for us is to try to make purpose real. You mentioned earlier, Steve, 181 CEOs signed the Business Roundtable letter saying that the purpose of a company is to serve all stakeholders. That's great. The British Academy has been producing documents year after year saying the purpose of the corporation it must extend beyond profits. But corporate leaders are saying, how do I make this real? And so what's next for us is to try to work with a coalition of the committed to make it real. Let's come up with, we're trying to get things like metrics in line. How do you measure purpose? We're trying to shed light on how you get employees more connected to it. How do you demonstrate purpose in action? And so making it real is the next step, not the words, the actions.
Absolutely, and that's what this conference is all about. So it's a great moment to end on. Thank you, Frank. Absolute pleasure chatting to you. Wish we had more time, but great to catch up, and good luck with your purpose journey at Blackrock.
I appreciate it, Steve. It's great to be here. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And thanks, everyone, for listening in. You can go to the next session, which is starting pretty soon. It's called about blending company and personal purpose, presented by EY. So do check that out. Thanks so much for joining us, and enjoy the rest of the day.